our last scenario here. As a new long-term care dietitian in a big facility, Lupita dove into work and quickly took on a full patient load within a few days. She learned a lot from her geriatric-focused internship and has great ideas for new patient products and nutrition therapies. She's motivated. Since she's the only RD on this floor, she mostly keeps to herself and goes off-site for lunch. When she has patient questions, she avoids bothering her boss, a non-RD nutrition supervisor, and reaches out to fellow grads from her internship. So she's, trying to go get them, and she wants to, be self-sufficient. At weekly team meetings, she feels that the nurses and the staff seem unreceptive to her ideas to improve the nutrition services of the patients, despite her emailing them websites and resources. Her boss even declined her request for slightly more flexible work hours, even though she's taking care of her patients well and hasn't had any major issues or mistakes. She's wondering if this job is a good fit. This is, again, a real scenario. So imagine this is you. You're a motivated, fresh out of your internship dietitian, and you're bright and you work so hard. You're finally doing this, and you can fill in the blank whatever your setting is. But you get into the job, and you want to make things better, and you want to grow and improve and bring all this energy to where you work. The problem is, though, is if you're an island, you're not going to be able to do that. So from Lupita's perspective, I know that she wants to do a good job. I know that she's motivated, and I know that she, has a lot to offer her employer. She also, I think feels like she's worked hard, and she, wants to be able to have some benefits. She wants to be able to have more flexible work situations. And since she's done well and she hasn't gotten negative feedback, she feels like she should be able to ask for that. What I believe her supervisor would think is that she doesn't really know what Lupita's doing because they're not communicating. She probably doesn't feel like Lupita is in a position to try to change a workplace because she hasn't been there that long. And I imagine her peers, the people she's emailing, are probably not super thrilled to have this person who isn't very collegial and hasn't really put in the time coming in kind of trying to change things and shake things up. So some major relationships to take away from this scenario. One is that you need to make sure you're collaborative, and you need to build relationships across a lot of different people. I think it's important, no matter where you work, that you make friends with the admin people, the people that, are working like at the reception, people that are working, some of the tasks that you might not be doing. So if you're in a hospital setting, work, getting to know and collaborating with food service workers, getting to know nurses or other interdisciplinary staff, depending on where you are, because you can't get people to buy in if they don't know you or if they don't trust you. And again, this is one of those critiques from, I think, some professionals, that many millennials come into settings and sort of feel like, this is the perception that I've heard, that like they feel like they own the place. They come in and they haven't put in the time, and they don't know the people, and they don't know the culture, and they just sort of feel like they use the word entitled. Again, I don't think I agree with that, but that's kind of the perception professionally. So in order to combat that sort of stereotype, it's really important that you show humility, that you come in and you ask people questions. You ask the nurses, how have you done things? Even if it's wrong, even if you're like, oh my gosh, we've learned not to do this. Ask and listen, and spend more time listening in your first 6 months of a job. You should be really careful about, how personal and, comfortable, like comfortable as in like, not staying professional, how comfortable you get with peers, but you should be positive and get to know people. The other really important thing is you should not be asking for special privileges or favors before you've really put in your time. So she's asking for a flexible work schedule, which would be something you'd want to negotiate maybe at the beginning of a position or at your next performance review, but not just when you first started the job. Because just because you've not done anything wrong doesn't mean you're necessarily doing something well. And something I'd like to point out from that scenario, you can see she says, because she's the only RD, she doesn't go to her boss for questions. And even if your boss is not a dietitian, or maybe doesn't actually have like the best answers, maybe you work for a dietitian who has kind of like outdated or antiquated information, it still is important for you to stay connected to your boss, to talk to them, to work through problems and allow them to give you input, because otherwise they're not going to really know, what you're doing in your job. If she never has communication with her, she might not know what a great job she's doing. So the kind of wrap up thing I wanted to end with is a few other things that preceptors and employers have told me. One of the biggest things that drives people up the wall is when interns or employees or grad students ask the same question twice. So it's fine to ask questions. We all have questions. But if you are in an internship and you're following a preceptor around, you're like, oh yeah, how many grams of protein for a patient with CKD? Oh, it's this many grams. Okay. In that moment, you should write it down. And I always get very uncomfortable when I have like a new employee, or when I'm working with a student research assistant, or when I've supervised a lot. So I've had new employees who will have meetings, will sit down and they'll just look at me and they don't take notes. My best advice is take notes when you're learning something new. Because if you don't, unless you have like a perfect auditory memory, you're not going to remember those details. And it makes you look really immature when you have to ask those questions more than once because you were given the information. Again, that is a professional skill set. Not everyone develops this, and it can be very irritating to be asked the same questions over and over. So in your first day at work, take copious notes. And when you're in your internship, make sure you're taking notes as you're going. So even if it's a little notepad, you can jot it down. It doesn't have to be in your special, tablet. It doesn't have to be all pretty and formatted, but you need to be able to kind of keep track of that information, because it also shows respect for the other person's time. The other thing you need to think about is that you have multiple steps you can go to before you go directly to your supervisor. Again, that's kind of the same scenarios that I've been talking about before. So rather than going straight to them, what are the things that you can do? A lot of times, interns and frankly even students can get answers to questions just by Googling. Just Google it. You can, what does this acronym mean? Google it, find out. You don't have to ask that question. Again, there might be situations where it's more free-flowing and you're talking with a preceptor or a boss and you're like, oh yeah, what does that mean? That's fine. But if you're consistently asking questions, it can be irritating and not a good use of their time. The other thing you should learn to do early on, wherever you are, is find out where to get answers. If you're an intern, you should be figuring out, where do I get answers for these questions on my own, so that if I am in a situation when I'm a professional, I know how to do it, as opposed to having to ask someone. Again, part of being in an internship is learning. You're not going to know everything, and it's not expected that you do. But what I hear sometimes from preceptors is they feel that students should, as DPD graduates, have the tools and have like a textbook and have some resources to find some answers to really basic questions. And they're kind of like appalled sometimes when people are asking simple questions that they probably could have figured out really easily, as opposed to using the time to grow and expand upon what they've already learned. Okay, so this isn't to discourage you. We should always ask questions, and I think it's really important to admit when you don't know what you're doing, especially if you're working with patients. You don't want to make a mistake, but you have to balance that with learning how to think independently and thinking critically. And so I think if you can do that, you're going to make an awesome impression with the people that you work with in the future. So I hope you found that helpful, and I wish you the best of luck as you guys enter, your future jobs and internships.